respected the world, but it flew away from her reach, so she ran away in her sleep and dreamed of paradise.
The evolution of the London Underground. We will explore the strengths and weaknesses of the Underground from 1863 to modern day times, discussing economics, politics and marketing. Join us on our journey. 1863. On the 10th of January, the Metropolitan Railway opens the world's first underground railway. 1880. The first tube tunnel opens. 1884. The Circle Line is completed. 1904. District and Circle lines become electrified. 1908. The name Underground makes its first appearance in stations. 1933. Harry Beck presents the first diagram of the Underground map. 1969. The Queen opens the Victoria Line.
Deep under London, a new section of the Victoria Line rumbled into service. For the Queen, who opened stage 3 of the line, it was only the second trip of her life in the tube. But the very automated facilities of what is now the most technically advanced underground services in the world are a far cry from those of 30 years ago when she made her other tube journey. Her Majesty inspected the automatic controls of one of the line's 34 silver trains, then pressed the buttons which set the loco in motion. That's all the driver has to do. Computers do the rest.
1970. The London Transport Executive takes over the Underground and the Greater London Area bus network. 1979. The Prince of Wales opens the Jubilee Line.
On the one-stop historic ride to break open the 3-mile, £87 million line between Stanmore and Charing Cross. It was only after the journey that the Prince was allowed to play at the ticket machine. Though after all, as he explained to his audience, he was something of an exceptional visitor.
Never thought, I must say, that I would end up addressing a captive audience in one of the underground stations. However, I'm delighted. You are captive because they shut the gates here.
Then the final formality, and the Jubilee Line was officially open.
1993. Work started on the extended Jubilee Line from Green Park to Stratford. 1994. The London Underground takes over the Waterloo and City Line. The story began with Charles Pearson, the first in a succession of underground visionaries. It was he who first proposed the notion of trains and drains in 1845, when the railway was a relatively new invention. The first steam passenger service only opened in 1830. Pearson, instrumental in the removal of the anti-Catholic inscription on the foot of the monument, was a progressive and a pioneer. His persistence helped persuade the House of Commons to approve a bill in 1853 to build a subterranean railway between Paddington and Farringdon. Construction on the Metropolitan Railway system, which came to be known as the London Underground, began in the Victorian era in response to increasing traffic congestion. The city's growing population made travelling in London very difficult, and it was thought that an underground railway would solve many congestion problems. The system expanded rapidly and included 12 separate lines by 2006. When was the idea of the Underground started? As we know, the first London Underground station was in 1863 and it was the Metropolitan Line. It all started at Paddington Station, formerly known as Bishop's Road, and travelled to Farringdon. With a grand total distance of 3.8 miles, this journey was small, but was to have a monumental impact on the future of our city. Apart from relieving London of its huge congestion problems, another reason to have the Underground was to benefit the lowest paid workers. The workers were entitled to use a special cheap pre-6 AM train. Social journalist Henry Mayhew interviewed some such passengers in 1865, thus explaining that this subterranean method of locomotion has always struck us as being the most thoroughly Cockney element of all within the wide range of cocaine. The labourers he spoke to all voiced their enthusiasm for a service that allowed poor Londoners to live further out, sparing them a 6-mile walk to work and allowing their families to live in 2 rooms rather than 1. What What many of us realise is we use this historical structure every day, how impossibly brilliant the engineering had to be to defy a generation of doubters. Its engineering remains something Londoners long should treasure as remarkable, grounding and empathetically ours. It is one of the true wonders of the Western world. In the early 1950s, Charles Pearson, a solicitor to the City of London, saw the need for a solution to the congestion in London. He put together a grand plan and submitted it to Parliament. It was initially rejected, but with some concessions and the backing of entrepreneurs, it was eventually accepted. In 1907, the Underground Electric Railways Company was going through a period of financial difficulty and its own existence was threatened. The company decided to recruit Albert Henry Stanley as the role of managing director, a British American who had grown up in America and made a name for himself working on the Detroit Street Railway Company. Stanley was reluctant to return to the United Kingdom to take up his new position, but after just 1 year, he had transformed the fortune of the company by quickly integrating the management and using advertising and public relations to improve profits. He is credited with forward thinking and pushed hard for the new legislation to control the transport system in London.
In turn, he linked the independent railway system into one body called the London Underground. Throughout its 150-year history, the London Underground has been at the forefront of innovation. And with 270 stations, serving 11 lines and 250 miles of track, the tube has undergone a revolution since 1863.
Whenever you say the word London, the word underground shortly follows. It is a symbol of London, its logo if you will. The underground is a tourist attraction with 270 stations to wander around. What more could you want as a tourist? It's never ending. London has so much to offer. The O2, the London Eye, Houses of Parliament, Buckingham Palace, Hyde Park, and so much more. It's no wonder why thousands of people flock to the capital of England each year. Businesses have caught on to this and have seen it as a way to make money. To make an investment in London is to make an investment of themselves. Low-cost travel, with more travellers using contactless payment and London's very own Oyster card. Frequent services, there is a tube every 2 to 3 minutes in most stations. It makes it quick and easy to get to your destination without the wait. Quick payment with Oyster cards and contactless cards. You simply need to tap in when you go into the station and tap out when you arrive at your destination. This is a very quick transition and means you don't have to worry about going to the ticket office and waiting in line for a ticket. The London Underground serves 270 stations, which means that you will never have to travel far to get onto the tube. And the tube allows its passengers to travel in and out of central London. You can travel from as far out as Watford Junction to as close as Leicester Square, all on the train. Many things can change in 152 years, and tube stations are no consolation. The stations are used by millions of travellers each year, and with the sheer volume of pedestrians coming through each day, it means that getting in and out of the station must be easy. With more escalators, lifts and step-free access than ever before, this is definitely a positive. With such a big heritage behind it, what are the plans for the Transport for London in the immediate future? In September 2015, 24-hour tubes will run on Friday and Saturday nights on 5 lines. This will bring in much more revenue because ordinarily the stations would not be open, meaning a profit cannot be made. Constant delays, overcrowded journeys and increasing fares sound familiar. There are many great things about the Underground, but these are not one of them. Along with pedestrian congestion, violence and abuse and engineering disruption. There are many strengths that come with the Underground, but also many weaknesses. With staff strikes come delays and the increasing fares to keep the staff on the payroll. Overcrowded journeys lead to pedestrian congestion and potentially violence and abuse. All of these things can take its toll on the company as a whole and can lead to a bad reputation. The London Underground is a very small and confined space. If you are able to find a seat during rush hour or even a pole to hold on to rather than fall over, you feel as if you've won the lottery. Being in such close proximity with strangers is uncomfortable at any time, but it is also very unsanitary. Many illnesses are passed from person to person, and one of the most common is tube flu. Just like the common cold, but it's London's very own form of cold. Transport for London is a huge company, so when staff strikes happen, it causes a huge snowball effect. One bus or train not running can cause a catastrophic change of events. Rail replacement buses, angry commuters and tourists, along with stranded passengers who don't know the system like us Londoners do. Having one tube station closed can cost thousands of pounds in just one day. London cannot cope with having an effective travel system. The London 7/7 bombings rattled the city. It was a shock to the heart of our country and took away the safety of the transport system. Many precautions have come into place since the attack. There are no toilets in the stations and there are clear bin liners so a bomb or unsaved object cannot be hidden. There is more CCTV than ever before, and the tannoys situate that any belongings left may be destroyed by security. Sadly, not everyone can be trusted and can take advantage of certain situations. There have been more sexual assaults on the tube stations in the last year than ever before, and Transport for London are trying their best to rectify the situation so it doesn't happen to another victim again. On another note, even though the Underground may seem to many the only way to get around in London, there are other modes of transport. The buses are very easy to navigate, and there are also Santander bikes for those who want to get a bit of exercise and to sightsee at the same time, a favourite with tourists. With all of this said, can the London Underground keep up with the rate of the rising population? The tube stations and platforms aren't getting any hugely bigger anytime soon, and more people are coming into the stations each day. How are they going to keep up? Watch this space. From 1863 to 2015, the London Underground has transformed in terms of social and economic characteristics. The rapid growth in population in the United Kingdom has hugely contributed to the increased need for public transport in London. Minimum wage outside of London for over 21s is £6.35, but London is slightly different. Everything is more expensive, so there is a London living wage, which is £9.15. Having a higher wage than the national average is a great help to those living and working in London. The increased demand factors such as London's gross value added and household income has also influenced how the city's population travels. Personal income is an important feature in how an individual travels. Someone with a higher income may have a car and a driver to get them to work, and so on from that. But someone on minimum wage may take the bus because it is marginally cheaper than the Underground. We are a generation in which everything is given to us at the touch of a button. Technology is changing, and modern-day objects are becoming more accessible than ever before. Major improvements have been made to the Underground in the last 2 decades, and it has made it the easiest form of travelling for most of the city. We are a generation of Underground users. The 24-hour tubes on weekends in 2015 mean that Londoners and tourists alike will be able to explore the city without a time limit. This will bring in more revenue than ever before because if the shop is closed, no profit can be made. In 2003, an electronic card with a microchip was introduced that you could top up with funds to replace the paper travel cards. This is known as the Oyster card. It has proved extremely successful over the last 12 years. 2.2 million people use Oyster cards every day, and there are 6 million cards circulating the globe at any time. The Oyster card was introduced to reduce queuing times at the ticket offices and to help create a more fast-paced environment, just like on the streets of London itself. In 2014, Transport for London made life even easier for commuters and made using your contactless bank card an option to pay for your travel. You simply tap in onto the card reader as if you would your ordinary Oyster. This means if you forget your Oyster, you can still travel without having to pay extra for a ticket. As well as this, TfL are adding Wi-Fi into many stations and buses. This is welcome news for everyone. You can keep in contact with your clients and friends on the go without having to worry about getting out of the station to be able to get signal to contact them. This is definitely a positive.
What we're saying is that we can move our staff out of their ticket offices, which are really becoming less and less relevant because of new technology, and liberate them to be more useful to the passengers, to the customers, help people, disabled people, people who are having difficulty with their tickets and so on. But also because of continuing investment in our track and our signalling, which we've fought for over many years. We're now able to do what I was told 5 years ago was impossible, which is run a 24-hour tube. So on Friday night, on Saturday night, round the clock, you will get tube trains running very frequently, particularly in central London, on these essential lines. I think that's vital for London, a global city in a globalised economy where people need to be able to communicate, need to travel during at all hours of the day or night. And I think very good for people who want to enjoy the whole of the London economy. What I was always told was, Londoners were always told, was you can't do this because you need to close the tube in the small hours of the night to enable the upgrades, the maintenance to take place. Now we've done a lot of that. If you look at what we've done on the Jubilee line, it's been totally transformed. We're transforming the Northern line, the Central line, the Victoria lines already got, you're going to have 36 trains an hour. We've put a huge amount of investment into this track, into this signalling, and actually into new trains as well. And that has enabled us to go ahead with a 24-hour system, with more trains running, with a more ambitious service, with trains running 24 hours a day, not just on these lines, but throughout the network. We think that you're going to see an expansion of London Underground. We've got 18,000 people already employed in LU. I continue to believe it will provide great careers for people for a long time to come.
Dating back to the 18th and 19th century, funding for the London Underground was very different. Before the Underground was fully established, papers like The Times ran campaigns against it, simply stating that if the Underground was to complete and work, it would never pay off in the years to come and it would fail. The campaigns were against the Underground because of London's rat infestation and the concern that gas could leak through the mains into the station airways. However, after a few years, many companies and organisations began to promote the railway because they saw promise in it. Shortly after this, the government gave permission to build the Piccadilly, Northern and Bakerloo lines. However, financial struggles struck and an American, Charles Tyson Yankee, stepped in to help. He brought access to the American money to develop the expensive tube railway at the turn of the century in 1900 and access to the American technology in which they were far more advanced in. In 1902, he was the chairman of the Underground Electric Railways Company of London Limited. He passed away in 1905 and was replaced by a fellow American. His name was Albert Henry Stanley. In order to try and make a profit, Stanley began a new marketing campaign. He came up with the idea of selling the experience of London rather than travelling into London just for commuting. He wanted to sell you a city, not a ticket. Fast forward to our modern times, the TfL is worth £10.9 million to date, with the main source of funding and income being fares standing at 40%, making a contribution to the cost of operating and improving our transport services. The decision of fares is taken on every year by the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson. The central and local government fund a grant, and this makes up to 25% of funding, being another main source besides the fares. The Department for Transport General Grant is part of the funding used covering up operation costs. Funding levels have been agreed for the period of up to 2015 to 2016. Business rates retention, which is funded from the proportion of local businesses' rates and paid to the TfL from the Greater London Authority. Transport for London borrow from a variety of sources using a mixture of mechanisms, including things like bonds, commercial paper, loans for specific projects from the European Investment Bank and the Public Works Loan Board. It makes up a further 13% of their financial income.
Across the Underground, train stations and track are being modernised. But with London's population growing rapidly, we need to do even more. In the upcoming decade, we will introduce the new Tube for London, which will mean faster, more frequent and more reliable journeys on the Piccadilly, Central, Bakerloo and Waterloo and City lines. The new trains will provide real-time information, and for the first time on the deep-level tube, trains will be air-cooled, making journeys more comfortable for customers. The new Tube for London is designed to meet London's needs making life better for customers and providing a service of which Londoners can be proud.